Welcome, everyone, to Howard Days, the Saturday edition. Nice to see most of you up and around. Some of you were at the pavilion last night and lived to tell the tale. That's always a good thing. My name is Mark Finn. I am a Howard fan. I'm a Howardist as opposed to Howard Scholar, which implies an awful lot of hoi polloi stuff. I'm the guy that wrote Blood and Thunder, The Life and Art of Robert E. Howard, and it is my pleasure and privilege to interview my friend and our guest of honor this year, Paul Herman. Hi. I told Paul I took this gig mostly because he and I never get a chance to talk at Howard Days. We're always busy doing other things, so we at least have 1 hour where we can talk, more or less, and hopefully come up with some stuff that you guys have not heard or are interested in. I do have some questions for you, though.
Yes.
To sort of kick this off. Your list of credits in Howard Studies includes author, editor, publisher, archivist. Can we say archivist?
Yeah.
And collector.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Did I miss any?
No, I think that, and bibliographer.
I'm bibliographer, yes.
Yeah.
On tour and Man About Town.
Well, I kind of follow.
Goes without saying.
I kind of file bibliographer under the author category because that's sort of like multidiscipline.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, when did you go from being the guy that read Robert E. Howard paperbacks to the guy that said, I'm going to collect this stuff? Was it a light switch moment, or did it just sort of happen?
It really was. I read that book and I said, wow, this is a great book. I really like this book. And that was kind of it. Because it never occurred to me there were more of them. No one said anything. And it came that moment when I moved to Houston. In the front of the book, or the back of the book, one or the other, it mentions Glen Lord. And, in Pasadena, Texas, and Pasadena is a suburb of Houston. And I first moved to Texas, to Houston in 85. And so I thought, well, I wonder if I should call this guy, because I'll bet he likes these stories too. I like these stories. I wonder if he's got anything else like this. I should check it, like this guy a call. And so, I just called information, and for the younger people in the group, just take my word for it. It wasn't an internet. It's a different time. But so I called information and said, Glen Lord, Pasadena, Texas, and his number was listed. And so I called him up out of the blue and said, hi, my name's Paul. I read this Conan book I liked. He goes, yeah. And I go, want to have lunch sometime? He says, sure. Yeah. I said, I'll buy. He said, okay. So we picked a play date, from work one day, and I drove over and met him at some little restaurant, and he was waiting for me, and we sat down and we started chewing the fat, and he said, well, what do you think of the rest of the Conan books? I said, what? And he's like, the rest. I said, how many more are there? And he goes, well, there's, and he's, that's kind of an interesting point. He said, there's several more in a series. He started explaining it to me, and I went, oh, that's great. I'll go find those. Because I hadn't been to the bookstores to buy stuff, so I'll go check out the bookstores. And he said, what do you think about Howard's other characters? I said, what other characters? And he's like, oh, you don't know? And I said, no. He goes, oh, he wrote a lot of stuff. I said, oh, really? Is it all kind of like the Conan stuff? And he goes, well, some of it, some of it is, some of it's different. It's all kinds of stuff there, So, I went, and so we said, well, we'll get back together again next month, and we'll do this again. And I went off and go raided the bookstores and found more Conan, and bought. And I ran into the same problem everybody else runs into that would buy the Lancer Ace set is, or at least I think some people run into, is you start reading it and it gets so uneven because there's a Howard story and you go, wow, that's great. And then you read one by Lynn Carter or somebody else, and it's not a terrible story, but you're just like, and then you get whole books like that. And I finally quit. I just threw those books away because I didn't want to read them again. They weren't that good. And just kept the ones that had the Howard stuff. And the next time we had lunch, about a month later, he tossed down a copy of The Last Celd, his big bibliography, and of course he inscribed it to me and signed it, and said, "There's some stuff you can go look for." Yeah, and I was like, and so I probably, and so at that point, it still was by far my favorite writer, and I wanted to read more of his stuff, and so I said, well, I have to go find it, and so I got what I could out of the bookstores, and I said, okay, it's time to start raiding the used bookstores, and so I started getting, lists of where everything was, and who was in the area, and what shops were big, and which ones were small, and how far I was willing to drive to go hunt. And so I started, and I just show up at a store and go down and find the right section and start fingering through it, and I got this one, and it just kind of started multiplying with time. And then at some point, there were still little stories I was missing. I'd look through his book, and it would say, oh, you need the, it's in an anthology. It's only in this anthology. I'm like, oh man, I got to look at anthologies. This is tedious. And then he told me one day at lunch, said, "Oh yeah, well see that book, I did the data I said the data stopped in 72?
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, 73. Published it in 76. Well, that was right before one of the big publishing booms. So all this stuff's in print, and there's no listing for it anywhere. I'm like, ah. So I say, okay, I'll just make my own list. And so I got on the computer, and I just, type. I said, well, I can start with what he did, and then start adding all the new stuff. And so I just literally started pecking away. There wasn't a scanner that would do. I didn't have an OCR scanner available back then, so I just started retyping everything from scratch, all the data out of his book. And he used a real big font, so it wasn't. And I have a very exciting life, and so I tippy-tapped away for a few months and got that all rolled in, and then I started adding new stuff as I'd find it. So every time I go to the used bookstore once a month, I'd pull every anthology and look at it and go through. They had a whole 5 shelves of them. I'd pull all 5 shelves, and I'd find new stuff. I'd say, there's one I didn't know about. I'd buy it and put it in my stack and add it to the reference list. And he would tell me about some new things coming out occasionally. He'd say, oh hey, there's this. Oh hey, there's that. He put me on to, there was a guy getting his doctorate in nuclear physics up at the University of Nevada, Reno. Nice guy. And he said, I told him he could go ahead and he wanted to help himself relax at night. He decided he was going to take a bookmaking class, and not the Las Vegas kind of bookmaking, but but actually bookbinding, making real books. And he said he's going to make some real nice books. He's bought some real nice material, and he sent me a note. He's a Howard fan. He wants to do some poetry. Would you mind if we, did some poetry? And so I sent him a couple of things that had been published before, but only like in little obscure places, so it's pretty scarce. And he said he's going to only make 20 of these, and he'll only trade. He won't sell them. And so I said, okay. And it happened that I had a business trip out in that direction, not too far away. And so I took the rental car, took an extra day, and drove over to Reno and called the guy, let him know I was coming. And Glenn had sent me, and showed up, and it was like, well, what do you have to trade? And I said, well, let's take a look here, And I had kind of an old beat up copy of Skullface and Others, Arkham House 43. And it was a pretty rough copy, and it wasn't worth a huge amount back in the day. And so I offered that, and he thought, oh, yeah, that's great. And he said, what else do you got? And I went, and I said, show me what you got. And he pulls out this big, massive, oversized book, and it's called Flight. And he's got silver stamping down the edges and on the front. You open it up, big heavy boards, big hand-laid Japanese paper on the interior, just beautiful materials. It's only about 8 pages, though. It's really slender. He's got somebody that did some artwork for him. He's got a couple poems in there. And a nice copyright page. And beautiful typeset he used. It's gorgeous. And so I ended up throwing in a little chapbook or something I had sitting around as well that he hadn't seen, and got me one. So he made 2 leather ones. He gave one of those to Glenn, which would be nice. And so there was always little things like that. Occasionally Glenn would let me know about stuff. Occasionally I'd hear about stuff, and we just kind of pass it around.
Was that business trip in that book the impetus for your foray into publishing? Did that give you the idea, or?
No, I mean, maybe it did. I guess, there was a lot of amateur press stuff at the time. Lots of people were publishing stuff all the time.
Necronomicon was the big guy at the time.
Yeah. But, the Ray Hoopa guys were publishing Howard stuff. Every now and then they'd put something in their journals, There was all kinds of little places where stuff would turn up. So I kind of looked at that and went, I could do that. So if I ever had a reason to, I could do that. And I finally got a reason when in 98, 97, somewhere in there, I was chatting with Glenn about something, and I noticed and we started talking about the Yellow Jacket. And I don't remember if it's listed in his in The Last Celt or not, but he said it is listed. But I said I never read those stories because they never got, one thing got reprinted out of it, none of the rest of it. And I said, why not? He said, I just never got around to it. Nobody ever asked. I said, well, maybe I'll do that. He says, well, you ought to go look and get the original stuff. I'm not sure I have it anymore. They still have the old school papers at the college in Brownwood. And so, okay, and I'm a shy guy, but I try to get over it. And I called the library and said, hey, this is who I am. This is what I want to do. Would you mind if I come in there and shoot that stuff? And they said, and Xerox it or something. They said, no, come on. So I get down there and they point me back to a room and I pull out these newspapers and they're like oil. It's oil skin. I mean, you peel it up, they're just wet from whatever had happened to them over the years. I'm not sure what that process of degradation is, but they were really rough and really bad. And I didn't have a scanner back then. I got 3 scanners now, but they, they said, oh, you can use our copier, go ahead. We don't care. And so I'm, folding them over and twisting them around and shooting away. And got them all shot, took them all home. And I know how to write e-text, and so I whipped out the e-text, got it all set up, figured out who could, do a jacket and do, basic things. And I think I printed it at Kinko's.
Yeah.
And, did 100 of them. And I'd already been around enough to understand the concept of rarity and all these little chapbooks that people do. They may not necessarily be great, but they got something you can't get anywhere else. And so I did that very same concept, Put it together, sold them off real quick, did a couple of printings. The first one was, the first edition is the one that's not yellow, even though it's the Yellow Jacket. The second and thirds are yellows. That kind of started me on just, some of the odds and publishing stuff. So.
Now we met in, was it 94 or 95? It was around that time.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Yeah. You came in, you were looking for stuff. We saw that I had a section of Robert E. Howard, which was very impressive at the time. But then we got to talking about Glenn Lord, and not long...
Was this in Austin?
It was in Austin.
But this one was in law school, 91 to 1993, somewhere there. Yeah,
so it was around that time. Shortly thereafter, or not, maybe it wasn't shortly, but it was still in the 90s, when the subject came up of Glenn's papers being sent to the ransom center.
Yeah.
You brought Glenn in, and we went and had coffee and pie, and Glenn brought some of the things from his collection that the ransom center people were very excited to see. And so you were one of the guys that really, I guess you brokered that deal for Glenn, didn't you? I mean,
yeah, I was talking, I knew about the Harry Ransom Center. I'd been to visit it. And I just, and I'd asked Glenn a couple of times, just kind of knowledge over the years, like, what are you going to do with your stuff? Because there's sort of a collection that's just stuff to buy and sell and has value. And then there's stuff that's historically important. And, that's kind of a different level of stuff. And I was like, what are you going to do with I understand selling off books and stuff, but what are you going to do with the historical stuff? And he says, I think I'm going to give that to the local Houston library. I was like, why would you give it to the local Houston library? He said, well, because they could take care of it. And I said, there's university libraries that do rare books and are real good at this stuff and will probably do better. I said, why don't you let me check the one here? And I was going to law school at UT at the time in Austin. I said, let me check the Harry Ransom Center. And so and it was so funny because this is true. I call him up and I say, hi, I'm and I ask for the director of the place because, I'm shy and I start small. And I get this guy on the phone and I say, hi, I'm Paul Herman. I'm a law student. He goes, yeah. And I said, I know this guy named Glenn Lord. He goes, I know who Glenn Lord is. we get his Howard collector. I said, well, Glenn has all the typescripts, right, or most of the typescripts. He goes, is that right? And I said, yeah. He said, how many? I said, I don't know, but he's got all of them, and there's hundreds and hundreds. So it's got to be, I don't know, it's got to be 1,000 pages. I don't know. He says, we'd really like to have that. He started reciting to me all the stuff he had that was kind of similar, and they have an enormous sci-fi and fantasy collection to go with all the other massive collections they have. He said, do you think you could get Glenn to come up and do a tour with us, and we'll try so we can sell him on how well we'll take care of his stuff? I said, okay. And so I called Glenn up, and Glenn was already getting a little older, but he said, yeah. So we came up, we got to see Mark and have lunch, and we went over there, and it was showtime. And this, if you've ever been there, if you haven't been there, it's a neat place to go once. They have one half of one floor open. It's 7 stories. They have one half of one floor open. All the rest of it is sealed off. It's only for researchers. And so we go walking in this place, and they've got, the director is leading us, and we're going from like place to place to place to place. And each, go up and down the elevator. And so like at one point, they have 7 paper labs where they do work restoring stuff. So we walk into one of them, and there's somebody and they've got an enormous light table. It's got to be 8 feet square, and they've got a book opened up on it, an old ledger book. And there's a lady in there in her coat and her glasses, and she's doing something on one of these pages. And so I'm a chemical engineer. I worked as a chemist. I know a lot, and I'd read up a lot on paper chemistry, so I know a lot of this stuff. And I said, what are you doing? And she says, this is a ledger book from a plantation in the Civil War. I said, yeah. I said, and so when the Confederacy needed to take it over to turn the place into a munitions dump, they needed a way to keep records of what came and went. So they took the regular book, the ledger book that they used to keep track of how many slaves and cotton and whatever they had. They got that. They made up some paste and pasted pages, clean pages, back over the top of it, and then started writing their notes. And so it's got all these pages glued on top of pages that have been there for 160 years or whatever. And I said, so what are you doing? She says, I'm taking it back apart so you can still read everything underneath.
Yeah.
Okay. And I kind of said, and we had a conversation about how you do it. It was fascinating. And it was going to take her a while. We went into another paper lab, and there's this book, and it's about this big, and they've got it opened up, and it's an ancient book, and it's all illustrated and just beautifully done. And I say, what's that? They said, that's the book of the world. I said, and I'm not a book guy. I'm a book guy, but not like some, people here, there's people here know way more about books than me. I said, what's that? And he goes, about 40, 50, 60 years after movable press was invented, the king of Belgium or the Netherlands or somewhere decided, now that we can do this, we ought to collect all the knowledge of mankind and put it into a single book. That was it. And so that's what this thing was. It was the book of the world. I said, how many of those exist? It was like 10. Well, what are you doing? He said, the last time they redid the binding in 1893, they used calfskin, blah, 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 blah. They start going through all the technical specs of it, and they said, so anyway, we're reskinning we're going to redo the boards a little bit and redo because none of the boards and binding aren't original anyway. So the boards are still pretty good. We're going to redo the skinning. And you're like, wow. And then they go down in the basement, and they say, so here we have notes from various people. There's a big section here for literary agents. Here's the original notes from Woodward and Bernstein from the Watergate stuff. You're like,
yeah,
wow. And we're walking by a bunch of books and shelves, and they say, oh yeah, and the guy reaches and pulls something off the rack, and everything, it's temperature controlled. It's about 60 degrees in there. Everything has custom boxes and bags and board, and it is an amazing place to walk through. And the guy pulls a little bundle off, and I'm like, what's that? And he goes, this is the original manuscript, James Joyce, Ulysses. You're just like, and it just goes on. It's just every stop was just, and so I guess, and then to show us, but then you got to think like, a library that's in the donation business. So they take us into this large ornate room, and it's got, huge walls and big hanging curtains and giant paintings of, important people from the past, and we're going to have lunch. And so they bring us a little cheap box lunch and a Coke. I mean, and a really cheap little box lunch and a Coke. And I'm thinking, oh, and because then they want to make the pitch for, well, we don't have any money. So could you just donate them to us? Because I kind of, well, why don't you just pay for them? They said, well, we don't, we do have people help us buy things occasionally, but that it's hard to line that up, and we kind of line that stuff up years in advance, and and they went through a very sad song and dance, and Glenn goes, I don't care, that's fine. And so after we left, Glenn said, yeah, now this was 20 years before his death. He said, or 15 years before his death. He said, yeah, that's where I want my stuff to go. And he told Luann, his wife Luann, told her the same thing, so she knew it too, which probably what kept her from burning it all immediately.
What year was that visit?
That would have been probably 92, 93, somewhere in there.
Yeah, it was early mid-90s.
Yeah.
Was Glenn retired at that point?
Yeah. No, I think he was right at the end of his time, getting close to the end. So he was still doing stuff though, I think.
What was he doing when he wasn't being a literary agent?
He worked in Champion paper plant in Pasadena, Texas.
Okay.
And he worked at various union jobs in there. And at one point, I believe he was the union steward at one time. Ran the little local union there. So it was really, Luann had told me that it was so fascinating that at work they didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
They knew he was a really smart guy. He was very good at what he did, and he had a real interesting sense of humor, but he was just one of the guys. They had no idea who he was. Right. At his funeral, all these people were going, who are all these people, and why is that guy speaking with a French accent, Because it was really, she said they had no idea. Her friends at church, they had no idea who he was. After all those years, they've been married forever, and nobody knew who. And the kids were even the kids were, even though the kids had gotten to go to Spain for the filming of Conan the Barbarian, so they'd gotten a little out of this, but mostly they were like, they didn't really appreciate how many people had Glenn as their grandfather.
Yeah.
That had adopted Glenn as their favorite grandfather.
So, all right. So to dial it back to the '90s just a little bit, the next thing you did after the Yellow Jacket was the complete action stories, and I remember the joy I felt when you walked into the store with that book, because it was the first time that at that I was already advocating for the boxing stories. These need to come out. We need to get them all. And here you come walking in with 4 boxing stories I'd never seen, and then the chunk of Brecker McJelkin stories that I'd never read. You're like, yeah, here you go. It's $20.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was now? Did Glenn help put that together, or at that time did you have all the action stories?
Oh no. That was part of the fun. Was as soon as I did Yellow Jacket and I sold it and I made my little profit, I said, well, I could do this again. I said, what else hadn't been done? And of course, at this point, there's the online groups.
Yeah.
And
we were all Zeniting by then.
Yeah, everybody's whatever that was. Yeah, we're all chatting together, and you'd hear. And so I'd heard the conversations, the Rusty Manifesto. We need to get let's get everything in print. Let's get it all restored. Let's get it back. And it made a lot of sense to me, and I appreciated the arguments. And so I kind of said, well, what else hasn't been done? And I said, look, all this action story stuff hasn't been reprinted. And I thought, well, all I need is the pulps. I don't own it, and I could do this. And so I call up Glenn. I say, so I'm thinking about doing the complete action stories. Blah blah blah. And he says. Yeah, I said, can I borrow your pulps? I need the pages to scan to do my text with. And he said, oh yeah, sure. And so like 4 or 5 days later, there's this box just dropped at my door, and I open it up and it's full of pulps. So I'm like, and I'm looking around, to see if I walked off with anything, I'm like, oh my God, I pull this thing in. And so then I had to go find a way to scan because I wanted to Xerox the pages out, so I just worked from that and give him back his pulps. And so I had to find a book edge scanner, which turns out is a real interesting thing to locate. Just a few libraries have those kind of things. In Dallas, it was only the SMU library that had one. I forget where it was. There was one place in Austin that had one. Maybe somewhere on the UT campus had one I could use. And, get a card and run the card, or a lot of dimes, big roll of dimes, just pop dimes, just and then and blow them up so I can see them better. And then I bagged and boarded them and sealed them up and did it insured and then mail, or maybe I took them back to them. Actually, now I think about it, always returned them. And so like when I got to go through the Glenn Lord collection in the last couple of years, I found all these action stories where I had bagged and boarded them in Mylar form. And I was like, yeah, there they are. And
that was Glenn though. That was
Glenn.
Over.
He was Glenn was always doing that. He was always helping people out. You asked for something, he said, sure, fine, whatever.
He put so much trust in the U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah, I guess so.
Perhaps a little too much.
Maybe a little, but it worked out. And he did that more than once. There was several. When I did the weird work set, with Wildside, I quickly figured out my list of everything I wanted. But then I said, okay, well, and I had some of these pulps, but I was missing most of them. And he said, well, send me the list. And I sent him the list, and he just, put them in a box, send them to, or a couple boxes, send them to me. And I was like, okay, shoot the pages, send them back. I used to have a big, I have a big vertical file thing. I used to have this many or maybe double that many file folders just full of pulp pages, Xeroxes of pulp pages, because I figured that was my source material that I could always go back to. I always wanted, it was a lot cheaper than having to go buy all the pulps, or then worry about tearing them up, opening and closing them all the time. So it gave me a raw source material.
And especially if you only needed the one story out of
it.
Yeah.
It made it
Why
easy.
go back into the pulp for that?
Yeah. And then also, out of that, you start creating e-text. And so your e-text library starts kind of going and spreading and going and spreading. And so, and I guess I started the Wildside stuff in the early 2000s. And that was where I'm going, well, I've done this myself. Let's let somebody bigger than me do it, because other people had other dealers had bought my books and resold them. And there was clearly a market for this reprinted stuff. And I said, well, okay. So dug out Wildside, and they were like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. And so we pulled all the public domain stuff, and off we went.
Yeah.
And and so I spent 5 years, virtually every day at lunch at my lawyer job. I would go sit in the conference room, pull out 2 bundles of paper, one the pulp pages and one my notes that I'm editing from my printed out e-text, and sit there and go, and make up and I had all the little pencil marks down from the manual style stuff, and get it all marked. I did it for 5 years, 1.2 million words.
Yeah.
Doing that, and I'd still pick up other e-texts here and there as I went along. So I don't have a complete set of e-texts now, but I've got an almost complete set. I'm missing a few odds and ends, but not much.
Now, so when the foundation, and by extension the Foundation Press was founded, Foundation was founded, because of finding.
Asimov would be so proud.
Yeah, he would be. When that was created, you guys, the Foundation Press's intention was to sort of pick up where the Wandering Star / Del Rey's had left off, and keep with that mission of getting everything in print, in a clean, authoritative style text. You started making day trips and weekend trips and business trips to go get the stuff that was still missing. I mean, there were a lot of things like that you had to go chase down. I thought it was fitting that your bibliography of all this was called The Never-Ending Hunt, because no sooner did you publish that, but that a couple of universities said, hey, we've got 20 poems.
Yeah.
Do you want any of those?
Yeah.
And the answer was yes, of course. What's wrong with you?
And it was always part of the fun was to say, one time we said, where'd the Tevis letters go? So I remember seeing when the nephew wanted to sell them for a fortune at the auction house and didn't get it. And I called him up and I said, can I come scan them? Because by then I'd gotten a scanner and I was scanning pages where I could. And I said, can I come? This is probably the early 2000s. I said, can I come scan them? He says, no, that'd ruin the value of them. I said, well, what are you going to do with them, when you die? And he says, I'm giving them to Texas A&M. I said, okay, that's good. And so finally, and I don't remember who told me, it might have been Rob or Patrice or one of the guys said, oh yeah, that guy died, a year ago. I went, and so I called up Hal Hall, who was the guy running the rare book library then, nice guy.
Hal's great.
Hal's a great guy. And I called him up and told him who it was and what I was up to. And he said, yeah, come on, let's do it. And so I showed up, and the wife went with me as she often does, and Rob came and helped for part of it, and we set up all our stuff, and and by now it's when we show up, it's at least one scanner or two plus laptops, plus notes and sticky paper and all this stuff.
Thing going.
A big notepad. Process. We got this down. It's rock and rolling, and start scanning pages. And they just said, sure, here's everything. Knock yourself out. It's nice of them to do that.
So at this, and of course the final piece of the puzzle, a bittersweet piece of the puzzle was the death of Glenn.
Yeah.
Which brought you into with Rob, and who else was helping you with that?
What?
The archiving of that entire.
Dina, the wife.
Okay.
She was by far Rob came in and helped on one weekend one time. It was very nice of him. Basically, it was Dina and I did the work, and it took a while to kind of get through everything, but got through it all.
If you just real briefly, I don't know that the folks here know what an undertaking that was. Can you give us the Cliff's Notes version of what that was?
It was just it had gotten they had a Glenn. When Glenn agency period ended, he was pretty upset about it all, and it kind of really upset him and impressed him, and he kind of quit caring about his stuff. And his wife, of course, didn't care about it at all. She'd burn it all just in a second. And so things just kind of and when you're a collector, you have to kind of put things away and keep. When I got stuff, I had to bag everything and make sure I had enough glass-lined bookcases. And at some point I said, I'm tired of spending all this money on this stuff. I just want to read the stories, So I stopped at my 4th bookcase full of Howard stuff. I said, that's enough, And I just stopped there. With Glenn, he had a relatively small house in Pasadena, so they just kept, and it got to the point where they had to put, she would say one day she'd come home and she'd look in the closet for a blouse, and the closet was gone because there were shelves in there full of books, and she's like, hey, where's my clothes? And you go, oh, I moved them over to that other closet and kind of packed it in, and you're like, okay. Yeah. She had some good stories about that kind of stuff. So he was constantly kind of improvising, how many more places, because he'd gotten to the point where he got, 10 copies of everything he worked on, and everybody in the world would see, every time anyone did anything in Howard, they'd have to send him a copy or 2 or 3 or 5. And he just, that's great, thanks, just put it in the pile. And so he just had endless piles of stuff like that. And then they had the Hurricane Ike that hit in 06 maybe, hit in 06, and that tore the roof off their house. And so, the water leaks in everywhere, and it's all getting trashed, and they got to move. They got to go. And so, and he'd already started using storage units for a lot of his collection too, just because there was nowhere left at home to put it. And so they had to move out of this house and go live with her sister, who lived about a mile away. And, they had to pull all the rest of the stuff back out and go throw it into more storage units. And about a month later, they're going to look for something else, and they open up one of the storage units, and it's completely full of water. And has been for a month. They said they had to throw out it was all mildewed and rotten, and you're like, oh, and the guy that ran the place never went to throw all that stuff out, because it was destroyed. And so, it kind of got, just kind of, and of course when stuff got moved to storage, it was just get all this stuff and put it in there. Don't worry about it. Put it in boxes and put it in there. So it was very randomly just, piled to the ceiling. So. And it really was literally, piled to the ceiling. So it took. That was an enormous, and just to try. And so the first hunt through there was, well, let's see if we can find. And I had to go have a talk with her about, Glenn wanted the typescripts to go to HRC, and she had gotten to where, when I first started having lunch with Glenn, of course, I never saw her, and I think I only saw the inside of his house once, but. He would just come to lunch. But as he got older, she wanted to start coming along, and then she found out we got along, and then she met my wife, who is way more charming than me, and they get along real well, and so we started making a regular habit of at least once a month getting together for a meal and a chat. And even when Glenn had a stroke and was starting to decline, we'd all still get together, and so at some point I had to say, well, you remember he said he wanted to go to Harry Ransom. She said, yeah, but they're not all in one place. And I went, well, I'll do the dig. If you want, you'll let me. I'll go through everything and pull it out. And she's like, I just want, and she was still really huffing about it. She was going to burn it all. I mean, she was really angry. And I said, no, why'd you let me do that? And she said, okay. She finally agreed, and so but it took us a while because I have a job, I have a day job, and so you got to find time to do it. And then when you get stuff, you got to bring it back, you got to scan it all, and then you got to identify it all. And those of you who sat through the thing the other day, you saw kind of what that's like, And lots of it was still in nice, neat bundles, and there's a complete draft of this and a complete draft of this. Those were easy, except for things on the back that you had to identify which draft that went to for each thing. So there was lots of tedium to go through. And the total sorting of everything took, 5 years. Been 5 years, and we're close to done.
I was always excited because occasionally we'd get an email from Paul, little help, and he'd have scanned in like 2.5 sentences, and you can tell it's on the back of something because you can see the print in reverse on it. He's like, I have looked high and low. I have no idea what this is from. Is this an earlier draft or something? And everybody would weigh in with their responses and all that. And it was always always fun to sort of peripherally be involved, kind of in some of that detective work. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it got identified. And then there were a few things that were like, well.
There was 2 pages that I thought were great where Glenn had a sleeve a folder that was marked Cull, or he had a cover that said it was some Cull story, and it had about 3 pages of this Cull story, and then it had a page with like 5 words across the top, and that was it. And I'm like, and so I go check the story to see if that line, check my e-text, search it. I'm like, yep, that's there, all right. And then the next page is 1 word, and it's like, and the word is like. And I'm like, and I'm looking at other drafts to see if it kind of fits in the flow of a story that didn't fit anywhere. Like, but he had it, and I said, okay, we'll leave it there. But and then that was a lot of fun.
So did you ever get a final count on how much of that stuff that you scanned and codified?
And that was, I was telling somebody else that I would scan. If there was double-sided, I'd scan both sides.
Yeah.
And we had it, Matt and the wife was doing a lot of scanning too, and we were just going through endless pages and then rotating it back to her place and then getting some more, and piling it up. And so we never actually got around to counting the number of pages.
Oh, no.
And we didn't get around to counting how many have some on the back of others. We know kind of vaguely the number, somewhere around 13,000, roughly. But someday that'll be some great, hardworking person who really needs to get a real life is going to go into HRC and sit down and count the pages.
It'll be an undergraduate.
It'll be an undergraduate.
Yeah.
Won't be me.
No.
But that's one of the things. I mean, if you look at my list, and then several things, I got to shoot pages like 8 different times over the course of 10 years. I first shot the library stuff back in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And then during 2001, during the big lawsuit, I got to be involved with the scanning of a mountain of stuff. When Paradox came in, they said we want to scan everything, and Glenn brought, some boxes, and we scanned that, and it was about half. We scanned all that stuff, and some of it I had scanned before, but I was just scanning. Every time I got to rescan, I had better technology, better DPI. Memory was getting cheaper, and so you could do bigger files. And so every time I kept upgrading, every time I do it, I'd shoot them again. Yeah. And so I always shoot the whole stack. I've shot the whole stack in A&M twice, just to get better artwork. So I have lots of duplicates and stuff too, and I have to weed through the duplicates and throw away the ones that are lesser and keep the better ones. And so they end up being 8 different bundles and all sorts of different levels of detail.
What was your out of all that? There was a lot of stuff that shook out that Glenn had forgotten that he had. Mm-hmm. And something and a lot of fragments that he didn't deem were publishable because you didn't know what they went to or this wasn't enough thing. What was the thing that you were most excited about when you found it? What was the thing that really just like
had to be the unpublished Conan novel that we're still hiding. I think that's the best. Wait, been back to tape up a little? Okay.
Yeah, this is all of the. The internet.
Scratch that part.
The internet just exploded.
That's right.
There has been fell off.
Kidding. Gosh, I don't know. The thing, there were so many. it was so weird to get so many answers to so many questions.
Yeah.
That you had about, what is this and why is that like that and why is there only those and what is this? And it was just, there were so many things like that. And we were able to answer so many questions about, how bad did Jack Byrne cut up a story? And let's go back and now we can see the final draft comparing to, oh, look at that, you pig, We got to see so much stuff. You get to see it was just neat to see the answer to so many questions, and to see you got most of the new stuff you found it was always fun when you found a poem, and of course I had all the poetry digitized. New poem, but even then you'd find other stuff. You'd pull out a photograph, and there's a if you come to the photo thing, I'll show you some blow ups of there was a Lovecraft photo he has that's apparently really scarce. That's signed on the back and done in, real nice thing. You were always finding stuff and going, what is this? What is this? What is this? What? I remember finding the jacket to the gent because I'd found the book and there wasn't a jacket, and I was like, I'm like thinking, where'd it go? And it was like 2 months later, we were digging through some other stuff, and I pick up a book, and there it is in a Mylar wrapper, all nice and neat, gently set underneath something else. I'm just like, and it was always like that. You just be ruffling through there and trip up something interesting. So,
yeah. But, obviously for me the boxing stuff was the great shakeup. There was a lot of really good boxing tidbits.
Yeah.
I enjoyed those.
Mm-hmm.
So what?
Oh, the maps. It was so cool to see the maps that went with the stories.
Yeah.
Hour of the Dragon in the first draft, he's sitting there drawing pictures to go with what he's doing. That was cool. And that was some of our better arguments. Was we'd get a little drawing he had done, and it's some boxes with appears to be some streets. There's a thing over here, a couple wiggly lines, and a little flag thing. You're like, what story does that go to? And immediately it's Indy would immediately say that's clearly Man-Eaters of Zambula, because everything's Man-Eaters of Zambula. and then somebody else would, it's an El Borak. I bet that's a El Borak thing. And we just go round and round and round trying to kind of place what is this thing, where did it come from, what's it to. So when we found I was telling somebody before about when we found we found a page, and we read a couple pages together, and it's describing Breck Elkins having a fight with a grizzly bear and falling off a cliff, and we're like, I'm going, yeah. I did the complete album. I did all these stories. I don't remember this, and I go through my text, and it's not there, and I ask the other guys, I say, what story is this? And it's just, silence, and so we published that couple pages somewhere, and then we finally found some more of it. It turned out it was the whole first half of Jen from Bear Creek, the short story. And he had done even a couple drafts of it and gone through this almost to the end, and decided he didn't like it and started completely over with a completely different story.
Yep.
And never knew it,
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff's kind of cool to dig out of the stack.
Awesome. Awesome to find.
Yeah.
Well, not to imply that you're not going to do anything else, but so I'll just ask, up to now, what's the project you're probably the most proud of? What's the thing that you look back on and that you always go, I did that. That was me.
The TypeScripts. That's the one, because I helped get them to HRC. I helped get them to some place they're going to be preserved.
Yeah.
With a place that wants to have them and is going to take care of them. We're also going to they want Glenn Lord's correspondence and papers, and those are going to go
Good.
in the next month or two. But getting that stuff preserved and then having the chance to scan it out so that when researchers need to access stuff, we'll be able to access stuff, give us the absolute final answer of what's available to use for text, to pick for the best story, to make sure we get the most optimal text for every story we do.
Yeah.
And get that kind of done. So much of Howard's publishing life was all about people doing stuff to his work and nobody knows about it. And you can't tell what's real and what's fake. We had got the OSU papers, the Ohio State papers, and we actually used some, and it's a bunch of poetry. Clearly not Bob's. Somebody retyped it. It's an old typewriter, it wasn't Bob's, but it was the only source we had for several items in the poetry book, so we used some of it. And then later in Glenn's correspondence, we find the letters back and forth to Blackbeard, where the guy, and this is a guy out in San Francisco, says, "Thanks for sending me the poetry. Yeah, clearly some of this was draft. Don't worry, I'll clean it up." And then this is the stuff that went to OSU.
Yeah.
So that's coming back out. It's just fascinating to actually get the answers and get them to a point where they'll be available for future scholars to work with, and for people that want to kind of know what's going on, they can know what's going on. To me, that's important. I'm not a big fan of hide the ball and figure out things and keep it secret. To me, the first science book I ever read was a chemistry book. Right before 7th grade, I went and got a chemistry book, or 8th grade, and went and got a chemistry book and just read it cover to cover in the summer just to get a flavor for it. And the very first thing it said in the front of the book was, science is about transmitting information to others. If you figure it out and you never tell anybody else and it dies with you, it's worthless. The only time information is good is if you share it. Now maybe the feds won't agree with that completely, but that's sort of the concept. And I really took that to heart. And I agree with that point, is that you don't hide all this stuff. Put it out there in print and go on. Let Howard get credit or blame for what he wrote and go on.
Does anybody have any questions for our guest of honor? Yes, sir.
If you don't mind, please talk about finding the typewriter.
I haven't found a typewriter. You mean what we mean, like thing up in Missouri?
You write something about you're finding Bigfoot.
Oh yeah, that was about. I was up scanning a typescript. There was a family, the Roadies, that had family that lived here, and the dad used to work and help take care of the what's now the Bombs house, and the little lady that lived there, and somebody had found out that they had a Jen from Bear Creek novel typescript that was maybe the American version had been retyped, and we were real curious to see it, and so I flew up to see it, and the foundation literally bought me a plane ticket on a rail car, and I did it in a day to hold the cost down. But that's kind of things the foundation can do. We can actually go do stuff, and flew up there. And she was just nervous as a cat, because, when people don't know Bob Howard, they don't know Bob Howard fans, they think, the first time they had Howard Days here, they thought it was all going to be bikers and guys with swords, and they were terrified. They were terrified, and so she was really leery about who the heck is this coming in. And I'm dressed very conservatively, and I'm doing my lawyer talk and trying to sound calm and professional. And she had a couple people in the house with her that were friends, just kind of watching. And finally, after an hour or two, she let him go, and we just, because it was taking a while. My scanner was going a little slow, so it was taking a while to do all the pages. And when I get done, I said, "You got anything else here?" And she said, "Well, I've got some letters." And I said, "What letters?" She said, "Oh, Doc Howard letters." "Really?" And sure enough, I had some letters she hadn't seen before. She pulled out letters, and we just kind of out of the blue, and we scanned the letters, and that's nice. And I'm like, is there anything else? Before I'm starting to put my stuff with her. Is there anything else that might be vaguely of interest? And she looks kind of, and then she goes, "There's a typewriter." And I said, "What typewriter?" She goes, "Well, they tell me it's Bob's." I went, "Well, why don't you pull it out?" And she brought the box up. We unwrapped it. And I took some photos, and she told me the story that went with it, and it's a nice story, And I said, "Would you shoot images of the keys for me and let me see the keys?" Because I know what Bob's typing looks like. I said, "Show me the keys." And all the keys have been replaced. So, is it Bob's or not? I don't know. No way to tell. So, yeah. But it was a very beat up old typewriter, and it had a really interesting story of provenance, how it supposedly came out of the Bombs house. But those typewriters are a dime a dozen, and everybody had one, and So, who knows? That's a story. So.
Yes, Gary.
On the Glenn's correspondence stuff, I mean, is that what, is there any letters to fans that became famous, writers or anything?
Glenn was buddies with a lot of people. So there's a lot of correspondence with Clark Ashton Smith. There's a lot of people in there. All the people you would expect wrote to him, and he kept everything. And some of it may have accidentally vanished into the mist, because people are young and it's need to make it go away. But there was some interesting stuff in there.
So the HRC is mostly just the Howard manuscripts and Glenn's personal correspondence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the decant papers are there as well.
Yeah.
Nice.
They had the decant papers before they had any of the rest of it. So.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's ironic that those guys ended up together.
I think that is kind of entertaining. Yeah. I like that when they roll out, if you ask to see the typescripts, I went up there the last time, I was wanting to look at something, I said, would you mind letting me have a quick peek at the typescripts? And I thought they'd send me in back. And they said, oh no, come up to the reading room, we'll take care of you. And
Yep.
I got to the reading room and they'd had a table set aside for me, and there's a little roller cart there. And it's got, one whole, it's, 3 shelves on the cart on each side, and one entire side is nothing but, the nice big acid-free boxes, all numbered and labeled on the side with the numbers I'd given stuff. And then the other side's like 1 shelf or a shelf and a half. And there it is. That's the totality right there, all in one. I was thinking, this cart will fit through the door. I'll be right back. It was just really neat to see it all kind of neatly bundled up, boxed up, all in one place, ready to go.
Not having to go through a wet storage shed to get there.
Yeah. So.
Any other? Yes.
If I could interject, just something we're going to be doing right after this panel. We're going to have the Robert E. Howard Foundation Awards presentation. Going to be real quick, so if you could all hang around for that, it would be appreciated. Now I will return you to our regularly scheduled program.
Yes, Gary.
Follow-up, you mentioned something about like finding maps and drawings and stuff. Is there any plans to maybe republish those stories with the maps and drawings?
Everything, as far as I'm concerned, everything is going to be republished. Now, some things are easy, like the map that goes with, when you get them like a map, it's a drawing, and so you could put it in a collected drawings book, or you could put it over in with the stories, which I think would be kind of cool. And we'll think about that and see which way we want to do it when we go to reprints of the foundation books. Some of it's like Conan story maps. Well, that's a Del Rey discussion. That I don't run Del Rey, and so I have no say in what they do. And maybe I don't know if they'd be interested.
There's no kind of map. I mean, I already had all the TypeScript when Del Rey's came out, so there's nothing to be added.
Oh, there's nothing to be added.
So, yeah.
So that's a very, very sketchy thing in one page of draft or Dragon. It's just 3 lines. Nothing interesting. I had all those pages.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Someday, I don't know if I can phrase the question right, but there's a company in Sweden who owns the
Cabinet Entertainment is what they call it now.
Do they have any right to the stuff coming out of Lord's collection?
No, ownership of the copyrights and ownership of hard materials is 2 different things.
Okay, so they only have a right to have
the publishing. If you want to publish it, if we want to publish stuff as a Foundation Press, we have to do it with their blessing.
Yeah.
And it was kind of their idea too. So,
Speaking of Swedes,
Whatever
happened to that guy that came and interviewed us that day? Christian, right?
Christian, I don't remember his name.
I remember.
Back in 2011, I got a call from the locals here, and I lived in Plano, so I was only a couple hours away, and they said, can you help us out? There's this Swedish guy showing up. He says he's a filmmaker, and he wants to shoot a documentary about Howard, and he's going to do it in 2 days. Would you mind coming down and helping him out? And I'm like, okay. And I'd done this before. I've actually done the entire thing before with somebody else years ago. And so I said, okay, I'll come do it. And so this guy, we all meet up here. And I call Mark and say, you got to come help, because they want somebody to interview on camera. And Mark, I'm a real shy guy. Mark does this way better. And I said, yeah, we'll do this. And it was the most fake. And it turns out the guy had won an award at the Cannes Film Festival in years past. He had an award-winning documentary about some guy that went native in Brunei, and it was just he's a real interesting guy. And he'd been shooting movies for 20 years. He really knew his stuff. And all he brought with him was a professional photographer, videographer person, and then he hired a sound guy who worked the cowboy games, professional sound guy to come in from Dallas to help him out. And he wasn't using any artificial lighting. He was going to work with all natural lighting for everything he could do. And it was shit. And so they did 2 days or 3 days from an hour before dawn to an hour after sunset, just endlessly, just going from place to place to place to place, shooting things, and doing interviews, and we sat down that first night, and they said, what am I going to shoot? What do we got here? And I said, well, you got to shoot the ice house. You got to, go to the library, go to the grave. I said, and it just happened that I knew about they were starting to restore the theater in Brown with the really old theater. I said, let me call, see if I can get us in there, and we did. It was just amazing to go into an old vaudeville theater that's unrestored on the interior. was just spectacular. And the videographer just went wild. She was just going crazy. And you know, Mark got interviewed more than once. I got interviewed.
Well, and they also shot us having an extended conversation,
Yeah,
which was
yeah.
great. We stood outside at the back of the ice house
At night.
which prompted a visit from the owner, wondering what the hell we were
An
doing
upset
back there.
visit from the owner. And so, you know, I'm wearing my cowboy hat for the occasion. And so I immediately go out there and put on my best good old boy voice. You know, hey, how you doing, man? What's going on? You know, and this guy is, what the hell are you doing to my property? I'm like, well, you know, and we start, and I'm kind of waving to the guys going, you know, let's get out of here, you know, and he's trying to decide whether he's going to get out of the truck and come have a discussion, and I'm like, or go get the cops. I'm like, these guys are just shooting a thing. It's one. Remember you got those guys on here for Howard Days to do the boxing thing? Well, this ain't. I know it ain't Howard Days, but I'm just saying. And he was real irate, and he drove off, and I'm like, we gotta go, you know.
So we finished in Gene's feed barn, which was fine.
And it was, and then the way they shot, they were trying to come up with a way to do some dramatic shooting. And they're looking around Gene's feed barn, they're talking to each other, you know, figuring out, and they say, what's behind that door? And they say, well, that's a back room they use. And he says, can you get us in there? And I'm like, hey, would you guys open the back door for us? And they pop the back door, and it's a kind of a long room, and it's all dark in there. And he turns on the light, turns them off, thinks about it, and he sees a back door out the back. He says, can we get him to open that door? Hey guys, would you mind? We're doing this thing, and we open. They're like, okay, you know. And they open the door, and he gets in. He kind of barely cracks it open a little bit, and lets it just sit there. Kind of looks at it, and goes, okay, Mark, come here. He sets down a chair in the middle of the room, sets Mark down, and turns him this way so the light's behind him.
Yeah.
And he kind of sets him and scoots him, you know, this here and there, and crack a little more. And the sound guy's kind of getting his stuff set up, and it was just. And when I saw the way they were shooting it, it was so impressive to see how it looked.
Yeah.
It was really good.
Nothing ever came of that. I watched for it for a while, and
Yeah.
I figured he'd call you and let you know it was done. But,
He had somebody on his team. He had some young lady working on his team that was. She would say, "Can I get these Howard photos? I'm trying to, you know, more stuff to fill in on this thing." And I sent it to her, and you know, and it was going away for a while, and then finally, about a year, I said, "You know, how's this going?"
yeah.
But think about what's going to happen, right? They had these long sessions where he and I are talking. Well, of course, they have to dub it in Swedish, right? And so, what's those dubs really going to say?
Yeah.
You know? Are they really going to say what we said, or is it going to say what he wants us to say? You know,
It'll be interesting.
So
He was working from a real personal place. He was trying to work out what Howard meant to him personally.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was interesting that he was using us to sort as a backboard for that.
yeah, and he cried at the grave, and the the two people that are with him are like looking at me, and I'm going, I see it all the time.
It happens. Yeah.
I've done this before. Let him get through it.
Yeah.
It'll be okay.
Well, guys, we're at the end of our hour.
Yep.
I want to thank Paul for being a good sport, and thank you guys for watching. We'll get started with some more stuff in the short run.